Good morning, guys, or good afternoon, whether you're joining me from the present or the future. Welcome back to another FutureFight Vanguard video. Today we are speeding up. We are past the Zoo Nation set, and now we are starting the Stargate set. So with that being said, we're doing the first deck out of Stargate today, and that is going to be the Victor Nova Grappler deck. Victor Nova Grappler deck in this set was a pretty dominant force. Pretty much the best deck in the format at this point in the sets, I would say. But we're going to start going through it, and I'm going to teach you guys all the things to know about this deck. So starting off with our grade 3s, we run 7 grade 3s. We run 4 Zubat Battler Victor. The new Victor has 2 abilities. They are both autos and activate on the Vanguard circle. The first skill is when your G-Unit strides, you can counterblast 1. If you do, you draw a card, you choose a card from your hand, and you mandatorily call it to rearguard circle. And then you choose one of your units until the end of the turn. It gets a Vanguard or a rearguard ability that is once per turn when this unit attacks. Choose one of your other rearguards and restand it. So, basically explaining the stride skill in a simple way. You counterblast 1 when you stride, you draw a card. You are forced to play a card to the board, so don't forget about that. And then you give one of your units the ability, usually Vanguard that you give the ability, but there's specific plays that you can give the rearguard circle to, because we run the stand trigger in this deck, which is Extreme Battler Winning Break, to kind of get like a restanding attack. It kind of has like the same ruling as the Wise Man ruling for the Angelic Wise Man deck, for those of you who know what that deck is. But usually we give the on-stride skill to Vanguard, sometimes we regret if we have the stand trigger, and yeah. That's it for that. Moving on to our next. Oh, we actually missed the second skill of Zubat. Second skill of Zubat helps you with your resources. Basically says at the end of the turn, if the number of your face-up cards in the damage zone is 1 or less, meaning you have 1 face-up damage or 0 face-up damage, you get to countercharge 1. And then the same thing for your soul. If you have 1 soul or no soul, then you can soul charge 1. And if you happen to countercharge and soul charge, you draw a card. So every single turn, you want to blow your resources all the way through so that you can use this skill, or at least blow them almost all the way through, so where you have like 1 soul or less, and then 1 damage face up or less. Then we have 3 Extreme Battler Victor, has 2 abilities as well. The first skill is a Generation Break 2 ability that says when this unit attacks a Vanguard, this unit gets plus 5,000 power until the end of the battle, and then you choose one of your rear guards, you stand it, and that unit also gets plus 5,000 power. So basically, when you are unable to stride and you are on Extreme Battler Victor, you are able to kind of use it as a pseudo, of a type of kind of on-stride skill of its version of its own stride skill. So you can attack with rearguard, attack with your other rearguard, restand a column, attack with that restood column, and then attack with Vanguard and restand that column again. So that's kind of how it works in the base form of it. And then the on-stride ability is during your turn when your G-Unit strides, you choose your Vanguard and it gains an ability, which is when this unit attacks Vanguard, you counterblast 1, choose one of your rearguards, stand it, and that unit gets plus 5,000 power, and then this ability cannot be used for the rest of the turn. So something important to note is that when your Vanguard swings, you have to use the ability the first time. In the case that you are using a restander like Big Plasma or Bustard, you should be using the first time you swing, or even Favorite Champ if you choose to use it on Favorite Champ. You should be using the skill the first time you swing and not like the second or third time, because you won't be able to proc it anymore because it's basically a once per turn skill. Moving on to our grade 2s, we have 11 grade 2s. We are starting off with 4 of the new card from this set, Extreme Battler Golshashi. This card is super good and super staple in this deck. If you're not running 4, that is a ridiculous notion. We have 2 skills. One is a continuous skill and the other one is an auto rush skill. So I'm going to stop right there and say that rush, for those of you who don't know, is one of Nova Grappler's keywords that basically whenever a rush unit restands, it usually gets some kind of skill, and that is the rush ability of it. So first skill is continuous rearguard circle. If we have a Vanguard with Victor in its name, this unit gets continuous rearguard resist, which means that it just gains resist as long as you have Victor as your Vanguard. And then it gains a second ability that says auto rearguard once per turn. When this unit attacks, you can counterblast 1, and you choose one of your other rearguards and restand it. So Something important to mention is that this skill is not G-break. So if you want to play down cards early, rush your opponent, you're able to do that. Our starter Vic's Head also kind of supports that. You can even, if you need to dig through more cards in your deck, you need to draw a card, you can ride a grade 2, and then you can play a Golshachi on your rearguard circle, and then attack with your Vanguard, and then attack with Golshachi, restanding Vic's Head, and Vic's Head will go off and shove itself in the soul, draw a card, give plus 2,000 to something, and then countercharge. Assuming that you have 2 counterblocks to do that play, but you usually do by that time, especially if your opponent crits you in the early game. So it's kind of like a you can punish your opponent for critting you type thing. Then its rush ability is auto rearguard circle once per turn, generation break 2, which means that all those things have to be fulfilled before you actually get this. So when you restand it the first time, if you're just generation break 1, you will not get it. If it's not on the rearguard circle, you obviously won't get it, and it is once per turn, so this does not stack. So when this unit stands due to an effect from one of your cards, this unit gets plus 7,000 power, so makes itself a 16k base upon restanding. Pretty good card. Next we run 4 Extreme Battler Ninjard. What Ninjard does is it activates on the rearguard circle once per turn auto, generation break 1. When this unit attacks, if you have a Vanguard with Victor in its name, you can counterblast 1. If you do, you choose one of your other rearguards, stand it, that unit and this unit get plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn for each face-up card in the G zone. So obviously Ninjard gets better and better the later the game goes on, because the more and more G units you'll have face-up will happen later on. And so, you know, this card starts off getting just like either some small amount like 2k or 4k, but then you work yourself up and then it gets like 10k, 14k, and it gives it to itself and the unit that restands, so it can make your rearguards pretty big. Then moving on to our last grade 2 we run 3 of. We run 3 Magical Performer. This is another one of our new cards from this set. It has a singular rush ability that's so good. When it's on the rearguard circle, once per turn, when you restand it, or when it's stood due to an effect from one of your cards, same thing when you restand it, this unit gets plus 5,000 power until the end of the turn for each face-up card in your G zone. So that can be insane just because like this deck turbos so well with G units, like flipping them face up. So you can, by second stride, be making this card like 44, 39, insane numbers like that, and it makes it really hard for your opponent to block. Moving on to our grade 1s, we actually have 15 grade 1s. Yes, we have 15 grade 1s. We have 4 Stride Fodder. Obviously, this is the Victor Stride Fodder. We like to stride. You want to stride as much as possible, and you want to increase your chance of striding with 1 card as much as possible, since this is not a free stride deck. Also, it is our Victor Searcher, so if we start off the game with an extra one of these in hand that we don't have to ride, and an Extreme Battler Victor, we can play down on the rearguard circle to search out a Zubat Battler Victor. Then we have 4 Extreme Battler Baryon. This is our PG for the deck. It has 2 abilities, a Continuous Sentinel ability, which means you can't use more than 4 Sentinels in your deck. You guys know that already. And then the second ability is when this unit is placed on guard circle from the hand, you can discard a card, and then if you do, you choose one of your units with Victor in its name, and that card cannot be hit, so it can only PG Victor units, which means you cannot PG your rearguard unless your rearguard just happens to be a Victor unit. And if you're PGing your rearguard Victor, you must really be struggling, so don't do that. Then you can counterboss 1. If you do, you can draw a card. So this makes the PG kind of free in a way. It just really depends on what you draw, but a lot of times if you're discarding something like a grade 3, you can't draw something worse guard-wise to have in your hand. The worst, you can draw another grade 3, and you already had that. Then we have 4 Extreme Battler Geralhork. I think in the English it's Geralhawk, but I might be wrong. It has an auto rearguard generation break 1 ability that says at the end of the battle this unit boosted a rearguard. If you have a Vanguard with Victor in its name, you can counterboss 1, shove this card into the soul. If you do, you draw a card, you stand the rearguard that was boosted, and it gets plus 2,000 power. So just another attack extender, combo extender in this deck, and it also works very well with Winning Champ skill because it fuels your soul. So the same time that you restand something and you're on Winning Champ with this card, you are able to Soul Blast as well and give 5 to Vanguard and give 5 to the rearguard that you restood. So it's really a +7 to the rearguard that you restood, not mentioning like whatever the other skills are. So if you restand a Golshachi and your Generation Break 2, instead of giving +7, it'll be +14, it'll be 23. If you're on Magical Performer, depending on how many units you have face up in the G zone, same thing. Then we have, finishing out our grade 1s, we have 3 Extreme Battler Gunston. Gunston has 2 abilities, an act ability and an auto ability that is Rush. The act ability is once per turn Generation Break 1, you can rest this unit, then you can choose up to 5 of your rear guards and they get continuous skill resist. So what this does for you is that if you're facing any kind of deck that can mess you up during the battle phase, which is Link Joker, Kagero, Narukami, Granblue if they're playing Night Rose, and Gear Chronicle, you can give all your units resist so that they cannot mess up your formation in any way. So that's pretty good. And then when it restands, it has its Rush skill. So when this unit stands due to an effect from one of your cards once per turn, this unit gets plus 4,000 power for each face-up card in your G-Zone. So this card is exactly like Magical Performer, except it's weaker because it gets 4K and not 5K. Also, it starts off as 7K base and Magical Performer is 9K base. Then for our starter, we run 1 Extreme Battler Victed. Like I said, you can do the combo with Goshachi that I mentioned earlier. You can also just, it has 2 abilities. So first one is Forerunner, moves back to a rear guard circle when you ride upon it. If you so choose, I don't see why you would choose not to, but you basically can move it out when it's ridden upon. Second ability is when this unit, or when your unit in general, is stand due to the effects of one of your cards, you can counterboss 1, put this card into your soul. If you do, you draw a card, and then you choose one of your units, it gets plus 2,000 power. And if you do not have any face-up cards in your damage zone, you countercharge 1. So basically refunds itself if it's the last counterblast being used. So basically what you can do with this is you can do the Goshachi play in the early game. Once you get to, stride zone, you can, or stride phase, you can kind of, or the battle turn of your stride, you can kind of decide what you want to do with Victed. Just use him as your last counterblast so that it refunds itself, and it gives you a soul as well. And then the last thing that you can do with it is when it's stood, due to a stand trigger in this deck, you can also use this skill, or if you restand anything, you can use this skill defensively if you need to draw a card, and you can give your Vanguard plus 2k, so it's a good defensive play right there. Then we have, for our triggers, we run 8 crit, 4 stand, and 4 heal. We are running, for our crits, we are running Extreme Battler Buchinuk. In English, it's Break Pass. But what it does is it is our Victor crit that when Vanguard attacks, these crits shove themselves into Soul, you draw a card, and your Vanguard gets plus 5k. Then we run 4 Sar Blaugrants. This is our new crit trigger for Nova Grappler that helps us fight against Link Joker, but also helps us with resource management. So it not only does it give us a soul, because when you place it on the rear guard circle, it has an ability that says counterboss 1, shove it into soul, choose up to 2 cards in total on your circle or damage zone, turn them face up. So what that means is that you can counterboss 1, shove it into your soul to unflip 2 damage, or you can unlock 2 cards, or you can unlock 1 card to unlock a damage. Whatever combination you choose to do, really good card. Then we have the stand trigger. Like I was mentioning before, you can use it as a kind of like a Angelic Wiseman type play. So using it with Goshachi on turn 1, or your stride turn 1 is very, very good, because you can place a column as Goshachi boosted by Winning Break. When Goshachi swings, it will use its skill to restand Winning Break. You use the skill of Winning Champ to make sure that you get to GB2 before you restand Goshachi. So you restand Goshachi with Winning Break skill, and then even though it's standing, it will still be attacking your opponent for 21. So really quick, Winning Break skill is Rush. When this unit stands due to an effect of one of your cards, you can put this unit on the bottom, you draw a card, you choose one of your rear guards, stand it, and you shuffle your deck. So not only does it draw you a card, it interacts really well with your cards, and it also just breaks you even, so it doesn't minus you like other stand triggers like Energy Girl or things like that nature. You don't minus at all, and then it also shuffles the stand back into your deck, and you have no chance of drawing that same stand because you put it to the bottom, draw, then shuffle. So you don't put it back, shuffle, then draw. So really good. Then we have 4 Arago Blau Energy. This is basically our G-Guard heal for Nova Grappler. When this card is discarded for the cost of calling a G-Guardian, we can bind this heal and bind another heal that's in our drop zone already, and then choose to countercharge one or soul charge one. Just more resource management. Then we are going into our stride zone. We have two of one of the best strides in the deck that we got this set is Winning Champ Victor. It has two auto abilities. The first auto ability is the most useful, in my opinion, but the second one is not to be slouched at either. The first auto Vanguard ability is when your rear guard restands, you can Soul Blast one and choose a face down card from your G zone, turn it face up. If you do, this unit and that unit get plus 5,000. So obviously during your first stride turn, you restand units a lot. So you want to be using Winning Champ skill whenever you can to Soul Blast restand, or sorry, Soul Blast G flip, and then give 5,000, 5,000, because that helps you turbo into like GB8, Stark the second turn, Victor, Bustard, you name it. Like all the strides in this deck, like Winning Champ gets you there. And it can really like open up your plays for you and open up your roads to your win in that game. But the Generation Break 3 ability is auto Vanguard skill, Generation Break 3. At the end of the battle that this unit attacks, you draw a card and then you choose one of your opponent's rear guards with the least power and retire it. So something noticeable about this is that if you go first, you can always snipe your opponent's starter. If they don't have their starter at that point in the game, they probably have a grade 1 or a grade 2 or something. But something to be noted is if their unit with the least power on the board does have resist, or it can't be targeted by skills or destroyed or whatever it is, you just don't destroy anything. Like you don't move to the next highest unit in power. You just can't destroy anything because their lowest unit cannot be targeted, and that's still their lowest unit. Then we have our ultimate stride. So since this is the first Stargate deck that we are going to be doing, this is the first time that you guys are going to be hearing me explain the Zeroth Dragon of Destroy Star Stark. So what Stark does is when you place this unit on the Vanguard circle, you can counterboss 2. If you do until the end of the turn, this unit gets minus drive -2, which basically means every time it attacks, it drive checks 1. But that's fine because it can attack 3 times. So basically you want to go into this, like I go into it when my opponent's like at 5 damage and doesn't really have a chance of surviving it anyways, because they do have to guard, 36 3 times, and that can be kind of painful depending on what your opponent's hand is. And then it also doesn't rest itself when it attacks, so any effects that would impede that, like the card that says that you cannot restand your Vanguard. I'm forgetting what it's in. I think it's Gray Elemental. But when you guard with it, it makes your Vanguard unable to restand. So that wouldn't prevent Stark, because Stark wouldn't rest itself. So that's very important to realize. Moving on, we have our GB8 Fang Dragon King Fist Drigger, or Drigger, like the Beyblade, if you want to say. Let it rip. Then we have an auto Vanguard skill, Generation Break 8 for it, which is when this unit attacks a Vanguard, you can counterboss 1. If you do, you stand all your rear guards, and until the end of the turn, they get a rear guard skill that says when this unit rests, stand this unit. And then for each of your rear guards, this unit gets plus 5,000 power. So something important about this card. Well, first, let me mention that when you go into this card, your opponent almost never survives. Like I've never played this card in any match where I've made it to this card and my opponent survived. This skill is just way too powerful for Generation Break 1 and, for Counterblast 1. And Generation Break 8 is just too easy to get to in this deck now. So you kind of, if you're fighting against Victor, you kind of want to kill them before they can GB8, because you're 99.9% gonna die. If you survive, you're just a god, or you checked godlike triggers, or you healed twice or something. But yeah, so number 1, you almost never survive. Number 2, things that people get confused about this card all the time is the skill that it gives rear guards and the power. The power actually just goes to your Vanguard, so it's not saying that that's part of the rear guard ability. Your rear guards don't get 5,000 for each one of your rear guards. That would be broken. Everything would get 25k. That would be so strong. Basically, just Driger gets 25k, and then your rear guards get the ability to restand themselves when they rest. So Same thing as before with the stand trigger ruling, the angelic wise man ruling. As soon as your cards swing, they will restand themselves. Any power that they gain from restanding automatically goes off, and then they're still attacking even though they are restanding. And then you can just swing with them after your opponent decides how they want to resolve that attack, whether they want to guard it or take it. Next up, we have one favorite champ, Victor. Another one of that we run in the stride zone just because you don't need to run more than two. It's kind of one of those cards where if you go into it, you're kind of saying like you want to risk it all anyways and just go ahead and win the game at that point. So its skill is Generation Break 2. At the end of the battle that this unit attacks, you can counterblast 2 and discard a card. If you do, you get to choose up to the same number of your rear guards as the number of face-up cards in your G-zone and stand them. If 3 or more units were stood, then you can choose 3 cards from your hand and you may discard them. If you discarded 3 cards, countercharge 1, stand this unit, and then it gets drive -2 until the end of the turn. So something very important to mention, or I guess a couple things to mention about favorite champ, is that you can use this skill multiple times. So you can go attack with the rear guard, attack with the rear guard, attack a favorite champ, restand all your cards, restand Vanguard, then attack with the rear guard, attack with the rear guard. As long as you have the cards to keep discarding in your hand, you can just keep using favorite champ skill. But after the second time that favorite champ restands, it will have no more drive checks. So do be aware of that because it gets 3 drive checks, then -2 drive, so 1 drive check, and then -2 drive, which would be technically -1, but they don't do negatives as far as drive checks in this game. So that's important to mention. And then another important thing to mention is the stand ruling that got put into place recently. A lot of people don't really know about it, but it is if you check a stand trigger, you can actually choose to not stand a rear guard, and you can choose to target Vanguard with the stand ability of your trigger, but your Vanguard just won't stand. The reason why that's important is because favorite champ Victor has to restand 3 cards for you to be able to discard cards and restand Vanguard. So if you only have 3 rear guards, that is an important ruling for you to remember, or a ruling that affects this deck. Then we have 3 Medio Kaiser Bustard, or Busted, I like to call him. It has its skill, which is Auto Vanguard once per turn. When this unit attacks, you can counterblast 1, choose the face down card from your G-zone, turn it face up. And then you choose the same number of your rear guards as the number of Bustards in your G-zone face up. And then you stand them, and if 2 or more units were stood and you have 5 rear guards, until the end of the battle, this unit gets an auto ability that says counterblast 1 and discard 2 cards at the end of the battle. And then you can restand this unit and it gets drive -2. So it's kind of similar to Victor, except it stands your whole board and you don't have to be as far into Generation Break as Victor to use it effectively. Moving on, we have 2 Medio Kaiser Vic Plasma. This is basically for if you're fighting against Link Joker or something like that, and you for some reason can't unlock your cards, you couldn't get the G guard, and you couldn't get the crit trigger, then you go into Vic Plasma, and it's basically a restanding Vanguard that just swings twice at your opponent. Its activation skill is counterblast 2 and flip a copy of itself, and then if the number of face-up cards in your G-zone is 2 or more, until the end of the turn it gets -1 drive, which means you're drive checking 2 each time. And then at the end of the battle, this unit attacked a Vanguard, you can discard 2 cards from your hand and stand this unit, and this ability cannot be used for the rest of the turn, even if you pay the cost after you decide to swing. There would be no reason why you wouldn't use this skill the first time, but just in case, you cannot use it a second time if you choose not to use it the first time. Then we run 1 Sabreeze for in case your opponent decides to play the grade 2 game against you, grade lock themselves and not ride. That is on them, and then you just Sabreeze them and you kick their butt. And then for our G Guardians, we have 5. We have 2 Medio Kaiser Gandred, or Gundred in English. It is our G Flip Guardian from the Fighters Collection set. It is Generation Break 1, which means you cannot use it if you have not had any G units face up already. So when this unit is placed on guard circle, if you're Generation Break 1, you can flip a card from your G-zone face up, and then you choose one of your Vanguards until the end of the battle. It gets an auto ability that says at the end of the battle that this unit was attacked. If the attack did not hit, you countercharge 1. So this is really good with the PG variant, because sometimes you'll use this use this G guard at the very beginning of the turn for the first attack, and then you countercharge 1 from that attack, and then every attack after that you countercharge if you successfully guard the attack. So when you PG your opponent's Vanguard after that, You can counterblast 1, draw a card, and then countercharge for Gandred's ability that it gave Vanguard. Then we have 3 Meteor Kaiser Dog Titan finishing up the G Zone and our G Guardians. It has 2 abilities. The first ability is a continuous guard circle ability that says if the number of your rear guards is less than your opponent's, this unit gets plus 10,000 shield. So very important to notice that you can guard with this card and then actually intercept to make the number of your rear guards less than your opponent's, and the guard shield will change itself from 15 to 25,000 shield, during the attack. So you don't have to intercept then G-Guard. You can G-Guard then intercept. It just really depends on what you want to do. Then it has an activation ability that activates while it's in the G-Zone face up. And then you Soul Blast the card, and you turn this card face down to your G-Zone, and then you can unflip a damage or unlock a card. So, or I guess it's more accurate to say you choose one of your circles, and you turn that circle face up, the card on that circle. So you can undelete your Vanguard, which is important when you're fighting deleters and you are on Extreme Battler Victor, because then you have a Generation Break 2 at your disposal. And then otherwise you can just unlock cards with the ability. So really, really good. Moving on to the games here, we are going to reopen our Cardfight area. Loading up as usual, being kind of slow. Alright, our Cardfight area is up. So we are going to load Victor Replay 1. So we're playing against Blau for round 1. We open up with kind of a crappy hand, but after Mulligan it fixes itself. Our opponent attacks us for 11. We take it, we get crit. We take 2 damage. The first one's a heal, second one is a Gyrohark. We ride and we attack and we crit back as well. Our opponent takes 2 damage. Then they ride and attack us, hit a draw trigger, and then they use Morgenrot skill to check top 3, search out a Mars, and then pass turn. We ride a grade 3 and we attack with Vanguard. We check a heal and a Ninjard. So our hand is completely set up now for a really good stride turn. Our opponent rides and then strides into the new Blau card, Blazer Blaukluger. Uses the skill of Bard to deal themselves a damage, just because Blazer requires that your limit break 4. So that is important in case you guys are wondering why that card exists. I know there's a lot of people who have asked me, what is the point of this card? And that's the point of this card. Uses the crit trigger to shove itself into Soul and countercharge 2. Then calls a Mars and then attacks us for 13. We guard that one. We take the 16k from the other rear guard, and then we take the Vanguard. Checks a grade 3, a grade 2, and a draw trigger. Adds the power to rear guard and uses the skill to counterblast, discard 2, re-ride from hand, and restand the rear guards when they attack with a break ride skill. We decide to G-guard because we don't want to get crit and die this early. So we G-guard with Dog and Titan, use the skill of our heal triggers to Soul Charge 1, and then our opponent checks 2 cards. They are neither triggers. Attacks for 18. I was hoping that would hit a trigger so I wouldn't have to drop a card from hand, but I did end up having to drop one of my Ninjards. I go into stride into Winning Champ, use the on-stride skill to draw a card, call Golshachi, give the power to, or give the skill to Vanguard. We Soul Blast 1 to use the G-Guardian, turn it face down, and then we go into our attack, so we attack for 9. Then we attack with Ninjard, using the skill to restand, giving power to nothing because we have no units face up already. And then we use the skill of Winning Champ to Soul Blast 1, flip a card face up from the G-Zone, give 5k to Vanguard and 5k to Ninjard. So we're attacking Vanguard for 16, that gets guarded by a 10k. We use the skill of Gyrohark, counterblast 1, shove it to Soul, give 2k, and then we use the skill of Winning Champ to give 5k. So we attack for 14 to Vanguard, that gets guarded. We attack for 16, that gets guarded, and then we attack with Vanguard using the skill to restand, and then using Winning Champ to give 5-5. And then we use the skill of our starter, counterblast 1, shove the Soul, 2k to our rear guard, and draw a card. Then we drive check because our opponent no guards. We check no triggers. Our opponent takes the damage, and then we attack for 28 to end out the turn. And my opponent takes it and checks the heal. So my opponents have 5 damage. and they start their turn. They stride for turn into Blazer Blaukluger once again. They call a Mont Blaukluger from their hand. They attack for 11. We guard with 5. They attack for 11. We guard with 5. They attack for 26 with no boost because I'm guessing they're saving it for their grade 3 that they're going to ride after. They check a critical trigger. And then they counterblast 1 and discard 2. They ride from their hand Mercure Blaukluger. All of their rear guards go up in power. We get attacks for 30. We are able to just PG that as well, counterblast draw. And then our opponent drive checks 2. And then actually passes turn so that we can't really do anything with our resources in the case that we could G-guard. Even though we didn't have a G-guard at that point. So we stride into Winning Champ just because it's the only card in our G-Zone that we can actually go into and still do something. So we attack for 26. Our opponent PGs, drops a card, and then we triple drive. 1 gets a crit trigger, gives it to Ninjard, 2 Golshachi, 3 Zubat Battler. So we use the G-EB03, draw a card, retire a card. Then we attack for 14, and we get G-guarded, and our opponent countercharges 2. We countercharge 1, and our soul is 2, so we don't soul blast 1 or soul charge 1. Our opponent draws. They use 2 cards from their hand to stride, and then they go into, I believe, Sone Blaukluger, if I'm not mistaken. I think my opponent needs some time to think right here. Yeah, and so then they're going to Sone Blaukluger. They're entering the main phase, entering battle phase, attack with Sone Blaukluger, counterblast 1, search a Blau card, and then it has a Limit Break 5 ability that activates at the end of the battle, assuming that they do not heal out of it. We use the PG, counterblast 1, draw, and then our opponent does heal out of it, unfortunately for them. So there's no skill that activates after that, and it's just rear guards after that. So we get attacked for 14. We use Gun Dread skill to G-flip, and then we countercharge, and then we get attacked for 11. We countercharge as well. Then we draw, we stride. We have all these cards face up, so we just GB8. We choose to use the on-stride skill, counterblast 1, draw a card. We draw the stand trigger, so it's worth. We give the skill to Magical Performer when we call it. We call the stand trigger behind it, and then we call the crit trigger, countercharging 2, and then we just attack. We attack for 13 using the skill of Magical Performer that we gave it to restand itself. We shuffle, draw, put the stand trigger back, and then we attack for 44. The first 44 gets taken, the second one gets blocked. We attack with Ninjard, restands our rear guard and gives 14 plus 14 to both. So Ninjard ends up being 23 and Magical Performer ends up being 58. Then our opponent takes it and dies, but had he kept going, we would have just attacked with Magical Performer for 58, then attacked with Dreiger, counterblast 1, restand both of these, and then they would have attacked 23, 23, 58, 58, and that's if we got no triggers. So that's kind of what I was talking about when I said that that turn is just way too powerful for your opponents to try to survive it, especially because of the pressure that you put on with your other strides in the early game and your other cards in general. Loading up game 2, we are playing against Gurguit. We draw, we have a terrible hand, we have 2 1s, a 2, and nothing else. We attack, we drive check, our opponent damage checks a Gurguit. We guard for a no pass because you ride to 6k. Then our opponent G-assist for a grade 2. They get it. They G-assist 2 of their cards away, which ends up being a stand trigger and a crit trigger from their hand, and 2 of the Holy Law or Heavenly Law Gurguit. We take a damage. It's unfortunately the new Victor, but we do draw into the old Victor as our draw for turn, so at least we get to ride to grade 3. Our opponent strides, uses the Gurguit skill, check top 4, call a Bellamore, call a card as rest. Moves a card back, uses Coel to check top 3, calls a Horsa behind of the Bellamore. and then calls a Salonius. Because of Salonius's presence on the field, everything gets 2,000 power, and then calls a crit trigger, Scarface Lion. Attacks for 29, attacks Vanguard, we just take it. They take a Vanilla, a crit trigger, a stand trigger, and a PG. So we take 2 damage. They are also crits, and they help us survive that turn without guarding anything else. We go into Winning Champ Victor, and then we realize that we have not really a good attacking force, so we want to use Winning Break, but I put in the column by itself, so I decided to move it up because I was trying to make sure that I couldn't rest it in any way, but I ended up having to move it up just to attack with it for 4k. My opponent no guarded, I attack for 16. My opponent uses Salonia's skill to get 2 5ks and blocks it. We use Hawk, restand, and then we use Magical Performer and Winning Champ, and it ends up with 21k power. We attack with Vanguard, restand the stand trigger, and then we use the skill to put the stand trigger to bottom, restand another card, shuffle, and then we use our starter, shove it into the soul, 2k to something, and draw a card. We check Vanilla, stand trigger, and a Arashid. Our opponent checks the heal but does not heal because we are at 4 before them. Then we attack for 33 to end out the turn, and our opponent uses their G-Flip Guardian to call a card. Our opponent strides again into the newest Gurguit stride. And then our opponent plays the Gary from their hand. Their Vanguard gets a lot of power. They attack for 51. We double G-Guard, making that 61, I believe, and then 71, so it's a 4 to pass. Our opponent checks the stand trigger, a grade 3, a grade 3, and a grade 1. So then we PG the rear guard, and then we guard the other rear guard with a 10. We stand and draw. I didn't really want to drop that Winning Break, but we end up drawing into another one for turn, so that's pretty good. And then we go into Favorite Champ, Counterblast 1, or we Soul Blast for the G Guardian, and we flip a damage face up. Then we attack for 13. After that, I was trying to figure out a way that we could attack multiple times, restanding, but we just ended up not doing that. So that we could use Favorite Champ twice. So we end up checking a heal trigger, Gunston, and a grade 3. We use the skill to restand 3. One of those being the stand trigger. The stand trigger goes to the bottom, restand another unit, shuffle. We attack for 16 again. And then we attack for 34. Our opponent takes the 34, gets a stand trigger as the damage check. Then we attack with Favorite Champ one more time. We get 1 drive, and then we decide to just counterboss 1 and discard this time. So we attack for 34, and that ends up being the game. The reason why I didn't want to discard the last cards in my hand is because, as you guys can see, those were some really good defensive options, and I didn't want to risk the defensive options in my hand to discard one more time to make Vanguard restand when it wasn't going to get any drive checks. So I'd pretty much just be like really hard minusing at that point. Moving on to Victor Game 3. We're playing against Gurguit one more time. Our starting hand is literally 4 Zubats and a crit trigger, and then we put back cards and draw again, and it fixes our hand, thank God. We attack for 14 damage. We attack and we crit our opponent. They take 2 damage and crit in the stand. They ride, they crit us back, so we take 2 damage. And then we draw, we stride, we play Magical Performer, we give the skill to Vanguard, and we have like kind of like a perfect little setup for the field, which is really good. We also top deck Stride Fighter, so without that we would have been in a really crappy situation. But fortunately we top deck Stride Fighter, so yeah, good. Then we attack for 26. Our opponent G-guards us with Rhea and then drops an extra card. We attack for 36, restand, +5/+5, and then you use the crits, shove to soul. We do check a heal trigger, and off of the crit trigger, I drew a stand trigger, which was really unfortunate. I could have forced more, but I just couldn't because I drew it. So our opponent strides into the new Gurguit, uses the skill, call Paramore, or Bellamore, whatever you want to call it, calls a card as rest behind Vanguard. Off Bellamore, calls this hand trigger, calls Salonius in a crit. Salonius gives everything plus 2k. We get attacked for 17, which we guard because we want to take the Vanguard. So we no guard the Vanguard, check 1 grade 3, check 2 grade 3, check 3 grade 2, and check 4 grade 3. So we know that we can go for a really powerful turn and try to kill our opponent here. So we just start, and we end up wanting to set up our board. So I was looking at everything to make sure everything was good. We actually gave the on-stride skill to Magic Performer so that we could restand it. So we attack for 29, attack for 29. Then we attack with our rear guard, restanding our other rear guard, and then attack with start. So start attack 1. Our opponent no guarded it, so we checked 1, and they damage checked 1, and that ended up being game. So yeah, that has been the FutureFight Vanguard video for Victor. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and like that like button, hit that like button, whatever you want to do. Love that like button. It helps a lot more than you guys think. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for support and just future updates with the bell button. So after you subscribe, make sure you click the bell button that's next to the subscribe button. Keeps you updated of when I upload videos or not. Also check out the description down below for our social medias, which are Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And if you want to support the channel a little more than liking and subscribing, then those choices are also down in the description down below as well, which would be our Patreon and our merch store. But with that being said, this has been Josh from Cardfight Empire, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace, guys.